Okay, hello everyone. I hope you're all doing well wherever you are in the world. For those that I haven't met yet, my name is Will. I'm the Negotiation Support Specialist for Africa with the CCHN. And I know we'll have a few people joining, but I want to go ahead and get started. We've got about 45 minutes today. And so just quickly before we get into context analysis, a couple reminders that we are recording this session, so good for everybody to know that. And also Andreas, if you want to say a quick hello, Andreas.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. My name is Andreas Kaufmann. I'm Communications Officer at the CCHN. I will support Will throughout this session. I will closely monitor the chat so that whenever I see that someone wants to say something, I'll tell Will and quickly jump in. And so I'll be in the background managing the tech while Will is facilitating the session. Thank you, and I'm excited to speak to you all.
Great, thanks for being here, Andreas. And so we'll start. I'll do a quick presentation, maybe about 10 minutes, kind of on two of the CCHN tools that we use on context analysis, and then really want to keep time for questions, but also experiences, where you've used this or how does it work for you in the field in your negotiations, and we'll block time for that. We'll wrap up at about 2:45 with a kind of a question poll, and then we'll stop the recording there. And if people want to stick around afterward, you're welcome. I'm going to stick around. We can keep exchanging and talking about this, but we'll end the formal session after about 45 minutes. So thanks again for everybody for making time to be here. We'll go ahead and get started. I'll put up a quick PowerPoint here. Hopefully that's clear for everybody. So we'll just run through kind of the idea today, this tool about gathering information, sorting information, and then the facts and norms. And with this, it's always a good place to start with the Naivasha grid. And where we are in the Naivasha grid, it's a simple one. I mean, it's really that first stage, that analyzing context. And with that, it's always good to remember that, I mean, it's with your frontline negotiator, but never in isolation. So always linked with the support team. And I think anytime you're analyzing a context, the more perspective you can get, and these tools are good opportunities to integrate that. We've also got the relational stage, and important that this is really at the core of the relational stage. It's really your launch point, your starting point. So as we go through, to kind of keep where it sits in mind, it's a chance to kind of establish credibility when you're getting understanding of your context and your counterpart, and your context through the eyes of your counterpart. How can you gain leverage in your negotiation? How can you build that relationship? And it really can help you start to understand your counterpart, your situation. What are you negotiating on? And then we get into how you're gonna negotiate. So this is the tool that was added into the most recent version of the negotiating field manual about gathering information. So depending when you did your workshop, it may be new to you, but a pretty simple tool that we can run through. I think it's interesting because it can help sort all of this information that we have. Some people say there's a need for more analysis and more information, and others, the challenge can be sorting that information. And so I also think this can be an interesting tool to help you in a new context to sort information, but it also can be useful with a counterpart or a situation that you've been working on for a long time that may be blocked or stuck, and can help you look at information in a new way with a new lens. So with this tool, identifying and prioritizing, how relevant information is, and a few things of those categories: knowledge of the source. So where did this information come from? And in the eyes of the counterpart, is that a trustworthy source? Is that something you could bring up in a negotiation that would have an impact on their view of things? The second piece about chain of custody, we call it. So all of those intermediaries that held that information before it reached you. Is this a direct piece of knowledge from an assessment that you did yourself, or is this one of those rumors that has started to become true because enough people have repeated it? So that chain of custody is a good thing to think about. Clarity of information. So when we talk clarity about, is there vagueness? Is it quite specific? Is it clear? And that can be a good thing to evaluate. And the last column on the tool, information has been corroborated. Is there an independent third party that has kind of verified it to try to take some of the bias away from that information. In terms of what we look at, we've got quite a simple metric of 0 being a poor quality, 1 limited quality, 2 good quality, and 3 the highest quality. And that's going to be up for you and your team to decide how you're going to rate things. But as long as you're consistent within the tool, then there's value in that. So if we just run through a quick example, I just created a few things that we could use. An example of our piece of information, this is something that comes up often at the beginning of a response. There's how many IDPs, where are they, those factors. So 30,000 IDPs living in a zone between 2 groups. We might say the source was a UN OCHA report. So a good reputation. We can have some trust with OCHA. So I just said that was a 2 for this particular case. The chain of custody, it's indirect. We didn't do our own assessment. We didn't observe these IDPs themselves. So for that, I put 1. It would be difficult maybe for me as a negotiator to put a lot of faith in that number because I didn't see it myself. In terms of clarity with this piece of info, it's pretty specific. There's a clear number, a place of origin. Let's say it's a pretty well done report. So we'll say that's good quality. That's a 3. And then this idea of corroborated by a third party. Not necessarily. We could use this report as our third party if we'd seen it ourselves as well. But we've got an assumption. We know OCHA. They've probably verified it through their partners. Our counterpart probably has an understanding of OCHA maybe. And so we add up those and we get a total of 8 for this piece of information. So out of 12 total points, this has got a score of 8. So not bad in terms of its quality of information. Then the decision is kind of, and you would do this through various pieces of information, depending on your situation, the amount of things you have, and your level of time and ability to kind of sort through some of that. I always ask the question after these tools, now what? Now what do we do with that? And depending again on your situation, you could use this now to say, well, potentially with these sources of information, maybe we need to diversify the sources. Everything is coming from a particular person or a particular office, and we need to diversify the amount of sources. Maybe we find out that our information is not as clear or specific as we thought it was, and we need to strengthen that. We can also, as we already start to think about a negotiation, to look at weak pieces of info. And maybe if we've got low scores here after we've analyzed, this is a chance to plan to maybe avoid bringing those up in our negotiation. We're not ready to introduce those into the talk yet because they're particularly weak. And on the flip side, if we've got something that we really trust and maybe it's firsthand knowledge and we can verify, we can corroborate with a third party, we want to express in our negotiation that we really have a strong source. We've got trust in that source, and we want to use that. So those are a few pieces to use with this first tool about gathering information. Not too complex, but I think a nice way to reframe and potentially work with your team as well. Both of these tools, a chance for, I think, international staff to bring the national staff perspective in, and the opposite for people working in their own society or context to ask for that outside perspective can be a chance to work on these together. So the second tool on context analysis, and anybody who's done a workshop would have seen this concept of facts and norms, and we have always a nice and interesting debate about facts and norms, and then looking at that center, creating that island of agreement. So just to run through that as a refresh as well. This distinguishing between the facts and the norms, defining, what is a fact, and a fact being observable. It's an element considered by the observer to be true. Things that have happened, assertions based on an experience. And we can have, as we'll see in the tool, facts that we don't necessarily agree on with our counterpart, but it doesn't mean that they're not facts. They just might, we might have some work to do to get consensus there. And the other, the norm. So norms, ways of behaving that are considered normal in a particular culture or society, a desired behavior that a group believes in. So norms don't happen in isolation. It's what's normal within that society or group. And these norms give meaning to the communities that define themselves through identity, common values. And so really keeping in mind how important it is on our context to look at the norms in terms of where we're working, in terms of where our counterpart is seeing things. So some examples maybe to help clarify a little bit as we work towards the negotiation. What are negotiable facts? So these are things that could be discussed in a factual negotiation. You know, back to that 30,000 IDPs, maybe the negotiation is about that total number. It's not 30,000, it's only 3,000. And then what impact that'll have on the operation. The location or technical terms, this is where we would talk about data statistics. And on the normative front, norms that can be discussed in a negotiation, often that right of access is a point of concern and interest for our negotiations as humanitarians. So where we negotiate access, the obligations of each party, who's going to do what and who should be doing what, the legal status of the population. We get into some of the international norms and then the priorities of the operation, looking at some of the humanitarian principles of impartiality and humanity. And so those are a kind of a further breakdown. Most of this comes from the manual for those who haven't had a chance to crack into version 2 yet. A lot of this is directly out of some of the chapters in the manual. So if we come back to the tool itself, and I've just put in a few pieces from one of the case studies, and again on the website, we've got a number of case studies that have been designed to take you through each of the tools with a consistent case study, further your own learning, but also you can use that with your teams and your partner organizations as well. So feel free to take a look at those. So if we just quickly run through this tool, an agreed fact between you and your counterpart, maybe there's a large refugee camp. That's indisputable. Both sides agree. Refugees are arriving every day, so they continue to arrive. That's a point of agreement between you and your counterpart. Potentially, your counterpart is a member of the host community, a government official. Refugees have been stealing from the host community. This is a contested fact. You could observe it, you could verify it, but there's not agreement yet between you and your counterpart on this piece. And then if we move over into the normative side of the tool, convergent norms that we can underline, that we can find kind of recognize there's potential there for building a relationship. Asylum should be granted to those in need. Not so specific, but that's something potentially you could find as a convergent norm. The international community has a responsibility to help. As humanitarians, there could be agreement there, and that may be something your counterpart is agreeing and looking for. And then these divergent norms, points of divergence, these are things to be negotiated. You know, the host community should have a say on the number of refugees, or there's a need of the host community that supersedes the ones of the refugees. And really what we're talking about with this tool is if you can slot in facts and norms and find out a bit where you stand, and then helps you suss out, one, are you working towards a factual negotiation? Are you going to be focused on these contested facts and creating some clarity there? Or is it more of a normative discussion where you need to find an understanding between you and your counterpart? And finding really with this island of agreement, I think it's really important to remember this isn't your needs assessment. This is not your technical understanding of the context. It's a way to kind of find some places, a point of departure, some places in common with your counterpart. This is where you start to build that relationship, which we know in humanitarian negotiations is so key. So it's rare that these negotiations happen in isolation or just once off, that it's a process, and it's about trust and connection with your counterpart, and finding some places to agree, convergent norms, agreed facts is really where you can start to build that trust and build that connection. I think a piece that the manual gets a bit more specific on, but I'd like to mention here, is just that paradox of humanitarian negotiation. So this idea of disagreeing on facts and having a factual negotiation, but you still would have some kind of normative connection there. And the example here, you know, potentially denying that there's a famine, but your counterpart would agree if there was a famine, you know, people don't deserve to starve. They should have food. And the other piece about the inverse, you know, you could disagree on norms, whether that's denying that the right to food. And I know some people even on this chat at the moment are are in situations where the host government is saying that these groups of people don't deserve access to humanitarian aid and food. But you could agree on some facts that there are people there that have a caloric deficiency, and maybe that's a place to start. So understanding that you can find ways to work without necessarily agreeing specifically on the norms, that there's ways to find understanding, and that it's not necessarily the idea to be right with these negotiations, it's to find a way of working. So you're not always trying to prove that you have the correct information to your counterpart. It's about creating a plan together that could work. And so just as kind of a quick recap here, gathering quality information, what's going on, what are the issues, what are the relevant elements of information, sorting those facts from the norms, and understanding are you in a factual or a normative negotiation, creating that island of agreement. What do we agree on and what do we disagree on? And then which path is our negotiation going to follow? And then a few final points just to wrap up on. Negotiations, humanitarian negotiations take place in a politically charged environment. There's tensions, disagreements, power struggles. We know that from our work. So it's important to be able to identify what's happening, but also kind of sort it, facts versus norms, distinguish where we agree, and finding, even if it's a small thing potentially to build from, but creating that island of agreement and identifying those hotspots, those areas of divergence to maybe limit or contain the disagreement. Maybe not forever, but for those first discussions while you're still building trust and connection. And then, and with that, yeah, it's about building a relationship, not to be right, but as much as possible to create an approach to the problem. So with that, I want to maybe I'll pass the floor to Andreas quickly, and then really open this up for questions, debate, discussion. Curious to hear what everyone has to say.
Yeah, thank you, Will. So just quickly to remind everyone, you're most welcome to raise a hand in the chat if you would like to take the floor, or you can write down your question directly in the chat and I'll read it out for you. It's really up to you what you prefer. If your audio is not, your mic's not working or whatever, that's totally fine. So I think at this point, we open the conversation to you guys and invite you to, well, you can ask any question about concepts or things you heard that you didn't fully understand that you'd like Will to clarify, or share examples of how you do context analysis in your daily work, and share with colleagues some of your insights and experiences. I think we have a few volunteers who'd like to start. Caitlin, can you hear us?
Hi, yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Excellent, thank you. Why don't you say a few words about who you are?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Caitlin. I'm with UNMAS, the Mine Action Service working in Afghanistan. Thanks very much, Will, for the presentation. I did actually have more of a question, and I mean, maybe as the conversation goes, I could add, comments or thoughts. But first, a question: the idea around tool 1 and the idea of getting scores and understanding what the total units are at the end of your analysis. Could you shed more light on are you trying to understand the overall, I guess, value of that information to your counterpart with that score? Or does that score show you that you don't meet a certain threshold? I guess I'm just trying to understand what the value in the ranking and the cumulative ranking is over.
Definitely. It's a good question, and happy to expand a little bit on that. I think in a lot of ways it's a tool like any of these that it would be difficult to take that tool that you worked on with a particular, if I did from my context and you did for yours, to find value in looking at those with the same metric, because we wouldn't have necessarily scored them the same way. But really more about looking at that body of information that you have. Again, maybe it's a new context, a new counterpart, and you're just trying to sort out where do we stand on our understanding of this situation. And so by kind of taking a step back and going through that process again. For me, the value is doing it with your team, and whatever that means. If you could do it with partner agencies, but a mix of opinions and perspectives and experiences, and then the scoring really to find is your information as strong as you thought it was. And then I think it helps by just putting it down and scoring it, that as long as you're consistent within your own table, then there's value there to see. Maybe everything comes out as a 12, and then you could ask yourself, wow, we've either got really strong information, we've done great analysis, and now it's time to move on, or that's a little suspicious. Maybe we're too confident in our information gathering. I mean, I think of a particular response where we came in, there was not a lot of operational activity. Humanitarian organizations had not been set up yet. And with one contact, we were put in contact with one militia commander. And the presentation was very much, this is the person that runs everything. This is your one stop to go for all your approvals and your understanding of the context. And what we learned over the course of the next 48 hours was that wasn't true. And we sussed out later why. And that person was still valuable, but they certainly weren't the only source of information. And had we not done a bit of an analysis, we could have really put ourselves at risk programmatically, but at risk security-wise as well, if we hadn't widened our scope a bit. So for me, that's the value of the tool. I don't know if that helps to answer your question at all.
Thanks very much, Will. No follow-up from me.
And then with that, whenever you can think about, how will this end up with when you are negotiating with your counterpart? Are all my sources coming from, maybe with the example I used in the presentation, UN OCHA, and UN OCHA in that particular context has a negative reputation. I'm going to want to find some other sources. So thinking about your body of understanding, but also how's your counterpart going to react to those pieces as well?
Will, we have a comment from Salvatore. He's saying, in my opinion, it is to get objectivity on a qualitative analysis, which is subjective by default. Salvatore, would you maybe like to explain a bit further what you meant by your comment?
Yes, thank you for having me today, and good morning, everyone. My name is Salvatore Farfaglia. I'm the Resilience and Livelihood Specialist for the ICRC based in Dakar. My opinion, this is basically a dilemma I'm living every day because I'm dealing with a qualitative concept as resilience is, and I'm trying to give weight, to the concept through quantifying, what is naturally qualitative. So this helps for a comparison, for example. This can help, to have a better understanding at the end of the analysis. So, for example, if I take the table here, which is the first time I see, at the end of the exercise, you can have 12, which is the top, of ranking, or you can have 2, 3, and this will give you, in my opinion, the final weight of that assumption, that you are analyzing. So I think that the quantitative effort of, providing coefficients, numerically coefficients, to each of the aspects, so source de l'information, chaîne de prise en charge. I have the French version with me, thanks to Will. I think it's a very, very good effort. It's a very good effort. Then it's just an element of the entire analysis. It's something that needs to be taken in consideration with some, other elements. But it's definitely an effort to get more objectivity in what is natural subjective, which is the way we consider the phenomena we are analyzing. Over to you, and thank you.
No, thanks for that very interesting comment, and definitely it's a piece of your process. You're not going to be able to go to your counterpart and say, I have information that I rated 12 out of 12. It will mean nothing to them. It's a piece of your building your process. Definitely. Thanks for that. Did maybe I see something. Krishna has gone.
Yeah.
Moments where people. Ramsey's got his hand up. Maybe we go to Ramsey.
All right, Ramsey, floor is yours.
Thank you, Andreas. Good morning, Will. Good to be with you all. I hope you're all keeping well. Linking the 2 points from Salvatore of subjective objective, going back to the idea of norms. And really the point I would like to throw on the floor and invite comment and feedback is that people tend to have a variety of sources of their norms, ranging from the, dare I say, professional outfit which they are a member of. Can you still hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, good. Or for that matter, the society from which they come, the religion which they follow. So these norms are not perhaps as simple or straightforward as would make life easy for us. But it's sometimes very useful to identify what the different norms are which are operating on the mentality of your counterpart. And it is not really confined to the official body which they represent. If you have any feedback or maybe anecdotes to share on that point, or advice on how to make sure we make best use of gathering information about the different norms which are affecting the mentality and way of thinking and feeling, perhaps even more importantly, of our counterpart, I would welcome that. So that's the issue on the issue of norms. Now, relating that onto the subjective objective is that a particular, what we might call humanitarian intervention, a proposed project of humanitarian assistance, might be interpreted in different ways by your counterpart, and the way it's interpreted is going to affect their response and their position. For example, if what you are proposing to do is to deliver, let's say, 1,000 tons of food assistance to those 30,000 IDPs, is that interpreted as a free material delivery, like an uncharged import? Is it interpreted as a foreign interference, basically your donor using you as a way to get into that locale to get more information? There can be a whole variety of ways of the same proposed project interpreted in different ways, and the way it's interpreted would either clash with or sit comfortably with the norms operating on the mentality of your counterpart. That's all I have to say. I hope it's of some use, and I look forward to hearing your feedback. Thank you.
Thanks, Ramsey. I'm really open to the floor as well. If you've got reactions to other speakers, I think it's much more dynamic that way. My first thought, just thinking about Naima's presentation last week, the recap, refresher on the iceberg, and looking at what's below and looking at values and identities. I think trying to find those norms and then the sources of them. And I see to Vincent his comments about making this a group process, and I think again that can never be repeated enough, that to reach out to different sources and try to verify or introduce new understanding there. Your second point, it makes me kind of think that intention versus the interpretation. So the intention of whatever that was, the humanitarian act, and then how is that interpreted by the population, but also maybe the counterpart. And the best intentions sometimes are interpreted in a different way. And what we can do with our analysis of trying to be best prepared for those discussions, I think the better we understand, the more prepared we are. But there's always moments of surprise where something that we thought was well received maybe wasn't. And I think I certainly have those in my history of humanitarian work where we should have thought through that differently, definitely.
I think we have Salvatore again who'd like to jump back in.
Yes, it's just to react to what the colleague was saying, Ramsey, I think, and also Will. Just providing an example, I think that the final objective of the negotiation is exactly to find that gap, of information, that point of friction, which then you can have to solve by negotiating. So, the dilemma, subjectivity, objectivity is helping you in the preliminary phase when you are planning for your negotiation to detect the areas which can be, you know, the areas of friction between you and your counterpart. And then finally, you can, once you have, you know, their feedback, and then perhaps, you know, different perception according to their norms, because, you know, negotiation process is a cross-cultural process in which, you know, many factors are intervening, and most of them are coming from the cultural identity of the stakeholders. Let me give you a quick example. When I was stationed in Nigeria, north and eastern of Nigeria, food assistance was perceived in a very different way by all the stakeholders sitting around the table. Okay, there were some of the stakeholders considering food assistance as a way to support the non-state armed groups. There were others considering food assistance as a humanitarian duty. There were others absolutely, you know, reluctant even to sit around the table. But we managed through the planning, we managed to, you know, through this measuring and analysis to identify this area of friction around food assistance. And then, you know, we were able to set a strategy to address this issue, and, you know, to try to, how we say in negotiation terms, expand the pie, you know, to avoid to be distributive in our negotiation process. So we finally managed to arrive to a, you know, to an agreement, which were something that were, you know, everyone was comfortable with. And so I think that this is exactly the moment in which you are identified that area of friction. It's really one of the most important phases of the negotiation. Over to you. Thank you.
Will, can I quickly read a question we got in the chat?
Definitely. I saw one from Taha about
Exactly, yeah.
engaging the interlocutor in the
Exactly. That's
analysis. I think it's a really good question, this idea of how can we engage our counterpart in this process. And if we look at ways to strengthen that relationship and the trust, I think this is an opportunity for that sometimes. I've been able to kind of gain some trust just by creating a sense of connection, respect of the authority of the other, to say, I'm hearing some rumors. Could you help me figure this out? Or I know in one of our challenges, when we have that challenges and dilemmas discussion during the peer workshops, and a challenge of constantly being new to a context, every few months changing context, and just owning that. I think Brett has talked a bit in some other forums about having some perspective and some humor about the fact that we're new to the situation and how that can build connection. But I think of it also to say, look, I'm new here, you're the expert, can you explain some of this to me? And then I'll sort that information on my own and verify as well. But it can be an opportunity to engage with your counterpart, to clarify. And of course, you wouldn't want to only do that process. You want to diversify your sources, as we talked about. But I think that's a chance. I don't know if others have experiences or examples where you've done that, where you've really talked to maybe a difficult interlocutor and asked for their inputs on your analysis.
We had another comment on Taha's question as well from Kieran, who's saying that from a child organization perspective, access to education is a useful societal norm that frequently is an opening with counterparts who are more established or long-term in a context.
Thanks, Kieran. I totally agree. I think education is an example as well of where we can agree on something with our counterpart, where we can agree on the outcome, the objective. Okay, we want to get kids back in school. And with that, maybe it's a military commander. I've had these negotiations when I worked on education programming where the soldiers are in the school. So we need the soldiers out of the school so that the kids, and we can restart. And even if the militia commander isn't knowledgeable or informed about the Convention on the Rights of the Child and education as a human right, that international norm, they can still respect the understanding and the perspective that kids should be in the school. And so it's an example. We don't always have to get everyone to be a signatory to the Geneva Convention to have these conversations and to make the agreements. It's not about being right. It's about getting something done a lot of the time. Thanks, Kieran. That's a good perspective.
We got a really interesting and longer comment from Manuel, who said he doesn't have a good bandwidth to to take the floor, but I think it might be worth. Is it okay if I quickly read through it, Will? Or
Excellent. Yeah, please.
all right. What happens if I'm delivering food in a community? Someone from the local businessman who is a regular actor working along with me tells me privately a story on how the local business association is having negotiations with the Minister of the Interior to push out my organization from that community, under the argument we are affecting their business because our deliveries makes people to avoid buying food from them. If these negotiations are really happening, there might be a risk my activities there might be jeopardized, but at the same time, how can I manage this situation without compromising my source of information? Obviously, can be gossip, but if it's not the case, the consequences can be serious.
Interesting scenario. I think Manuel just signed up to design our next case study, because maybe we could run that through all of the tools. There's quite a few elements there. I don't know if anybody else wants to jump in. I don't want to just be the only voice on here. I see a few WFP participants, experts in food, that may be able to help me out. But that last piece as well was a question I had for the group about the source. You know, when you've got a trusted source, but you don't want to expose them to risk, and maybe your counterpart is saying, "Where did you hear this?" Or only one person could have given you that information. How do you protect your source while still showing that you have credible information? A real dilemma, I think, in the front line. Any thoughts for Manuel? I see Salvatore has said maybe creating added value for the stakeholders. So is there a way to adjust your programming? Is there a way to find some new modalities that support this kind of third party into the negotiations? That question of when do you engage and open the door, or when do you kind of try to keep it to one counterpart?
Salvatore, I see you raised your hand again. Please go ahead.
Yes, without monopolizing, the session, of course. Just to provide a quick example to what Manuel was saying. So basically, when I was stationed in Burkina Faso, this was one of the problems. There were many stakeholders, moving food items, in the market, and some of them were very concerned about the arrival of massive arrival of the international community. They were looking at us like a threat. So, sometimes it's very important. I mean, if you can identify this as the issue to solve, then you can find other ways, to solve the issue. So focus on problems and not on people. This is one of the other rule of principled negotiation. So basically what we did there, we find out that the market was quite absorptive in terms of, transactions. And instead of injecting food assistance ourselves, we mobilized, the food items through voucher programs. So we basically provided, a role to the stakeholders who were afraid to be cut off from the business. Okay, and this was negotiated, and it was negotiated exactly for what Manuel was saying, because we had the source that, allowed us to understand in our planning that this was one of the issue. And we wanted to avoid the, conflictuality around the food assistance. Over to you.
Excellent example. Thanks for that. And I think it speaks to this idea that really the best negotiators are the negotiators who are always looking for new options. And I think that's true for humanitarian professionals as well, finding different ways of working. And I like that, focusing on the problem and not on the person in this particular instance. The last piece I can think about is that mapping, the mapping tool, leveraging influence, and with Manuel's example, bringing in some of these other pieces to that where you wouldn't maybe in your first analysis understand the influence going on there, and looking at some of those other groups or other individuals who are impacting that situation could be useful to take a look at that tool as well. Thanks
I think Taha would like to add to this. About the situation when you don't have the source at all. Please go ahead.
I'm Taha from ICRC in South Sudan. One of the main challenges, to be honest, that sometimes you don't have a source and you don't have a proper analysis done already, or you're thrown in a situation that you don't have enough information, but at the same time you need to go through a negotiation. And the analysis of the information that we had might be seemed like a decision that we have taken for them, meaning that according to your own points, according to these facts, you should be able to do that or allow us to do that. But what we had the challenge is that either both of the things, either that the interlocutor is skeptical and suspect that who's your source and where did you hear that, or take a defensive position as and try to give new false fact or new decision that they have taken on the spot, just to diverse us from the topic itself. And I totally agree on the focusing on the topic, on the issue of the problem itself, rather than the decision or either of the both positions. But it's really tricky to make the topic or the problem from the perspective of the interlocutor. And it's always a challenge that once we try to do that, once we try to make this like, we do agree on that we both have this agreement or this common ground, they start to drift us towards their own interest. And this has been like a struggle every time we go to interlocutor. We try to, with the first information that we try to get, not the context of an answer, but the interlocutor himself, which is not always easy. So also back to my first point, that if there's a tool we can engage interlocutor in this analysis on the spot, like as the simple question of what do you think is best, how do you perceive this, would you think this would be better, or advise, one of the tools, but it's not really effective with all interactor or all context.
Definitely, thanks for that. I know that on operational environment well in South Sudan, and you've got to move quickly, but you don't always have all that information. But thinking as well about the way you described it, this idea that, you know, engaging the counterpart also, you know, this relationship that we speak of, it can work both ways. And if they're implicated in the decision-making process, they may be more, if we talk about sustainable programming and a negotiation that's going to last as we engage in the transaction and start delivering. If they're involved from early, maybe they're going to be more engaged to see that through to the end, potentially. I see maybe one last from Vincent. I don't know if we can get you on audio or if you just wanted to leave that on an interesting point about the mapping tool.
I think my audio works. Can you hear me well?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Hey, greetings from Italy. No, what I put on the chat as well is that one of the things that is one of the simplest tools that I've seen so far, and that's helped me the most, and it was quite revelatory, was what we discussed in the retreating call. I don't know who exactly proposed that model, but before the C, the I, and the A, so not the CIA, but the control, influence, and accept model. And I found that super useful because very often in my position, I go and I fly in helicopter-wise to help country managers specifically with dealing increasingly now with robust government responses and less with armed groups. And what they find often is that they can't see the forest through the trees or vice versa in terms of what they should prioritize, which interlocutors to favor over others, etc. So, and that kind of falls into the whole influence mapping tool that's also proposed through the Naivasha grid. But it's a really, really useful addendum to it, and it's something I think to consider for all the participants, future participants. The CIA model is very, very useful.
Great, thanks for that, Vincent. And that, what Vincent is referring to was the retreat, negotiating under pressure in stressful situations that we had in Switzerland at the end of last year. So some things are developing with that kind of work stream as well. So there might be more information on that crisis negotiation as well as things develop. I see time-wise, and I don't see any more pressing questions in the chat. Maybe we use that as a chance to wrap up the formal webinar, and it's a good segue as we think about what we do next with these digital engagements. We had a poll question we wanted to put to everybody, and then we can show the results and wrap things up. So here from Andreas, what kind of webinars would you like us to organize in the near future?
And maybe just
Webinars, issue specific, or more of an open forum? Sorry, Andreas, you go ahead.
Yeah, exactly. So I just wanted to quickly say why you also asked this question. This is now the third webinar on negotiation tools. We'll have another 3 of those coming up in the next couple of weeks. Next week will be on stakeholder mapping and will be presented by our head of operation, Joël Germanier. After these 3 tools, and even now, we're already thinking about what else we can do while our activities are on hold, our on-site activities. And there's obviously lots of different ideas that we hear from the community. So yeah, we ask these, we give you 4 options. I'll share with you the results in a second. I see a few more people a few people have already voted. Let's maybe just wait for a few more responses. More than half now shared their opinion.
Don't think too hard about it. Just whatever your instincts. So on a particular context, an issue, or more of an open forum, or to continue with these tools. We've got some more tools lined up, and then we could go through all of them if that's of interest to the community. And just while we wait for the last few to come in, maybe I'll just mention that I think today everyone should be receiving a survey about how you are managing and working in the context of COVID-19, and that's another work stream that we're starting to really explore on where could we support humanitarians who are facing new challenges based on COVID-19. So that's, check your inboxes for that. Really appreciate people's perspective there, and there's going to be some more discussions and things coming soon on that topic. Andreas, are we ready to go?
Yeah, I'll wrap up the poll. Not everybody answered, but that's totally okay. I just shared with you some of the, exactly.
A bit of a mix here, issue specific on certain subjects, context specific, certainly something we're looking at, kind of that peer circle model, but with particular context. More tools, and not too much interest in an open forum where the participants set the agenda. Okay, the pressure is on us to keep these going. That's fair. I'm okay with that. Cool. Thanks everyone for filling that in, but also your engagement, your questions, and just taking time out of your day to join us. So with that, I want to thanks everyone. Thanks to Andreas for the facilitation support. We're going to go ahead and wrap up the recording. And as I said at the beginning, anyone who wants to stay in the meeting and keep engaging on this, feel free. But that'll be the wrap up of kind of the formal webinar. So thanks again, everyone.